open the session.
All right, welcome everyone to our session. My name is Missouri Colley, and I am the Development and Database Manager with Women's Foundation California. So excited to welcome you to this session. But as we get started, I would like to invite all of you to first introduce yourself down in the chat. Please let us know your name, and where you're joining from. Nina is going to share a link for you to find out what native lands you are joining from, so that you can also share that in the chat as well. So thank you so much for tracking that, Nina. So I just want to give a little introduction to our conversation today, which is budget and money management foundations. This session is an ongoing part of an ongoing financial education series that we've been providing through our California Women Rising programming, which is made possible through institutional support as well as support from generous individual donors as well. So our workshop will be led today by Rita Zhang, who is a financial empowerment educator, facilitator, and coach with over 14 years of experience in this field, with a lot of information to share with you. She represents Sage Consulting, who we've been partnering with throughout this financial education series. So there's so much information for us to gain from this session. I do want to let you know one clarifying point, that our session will go through 6:30 p.m. today. If you do need to drop off early, that's fine. We will be recording this session, so you'll have an opportunity to catch the last 30 minutes if you have another engagement. But with that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Rita. Again, thank you so much, everyone, for joining, and I hope you take as much out of this session as you can. So thank you all.
Hi, everyone. I'm Rita Zhang, she, her pronouns. I'm very happy to be here with you all tonight. I am calling in today from the indigenous territories of the Chochenyo Ohlone people, also Oakland, California, and I'm really happy to be here with you all. I'm seeing some of you all start sharing where you're calling from and your names and pronouns, so please continue to do that, just so that we can kind of see who we have in this space, in this community tonight. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now. The slide deck I'm using tonight will be sent out to you all afterwards, so feel free to take notes if that's really helpful for you as a learner, but also know that you'll get all of this information after the event as well. Alrighty. So as Missouri was sharing, I am a financial empowerment coach with Sage Financial Solutions. We're a team of really awesome people, in my opinion, though I'm really biased, of course, that's committed to doing anti-poverty work, right? And our executive director and founder, Sandra Davis, really is a phenomenal woman that led our first 2 workshops of these series at the end of last year. And we really want to create a world where everyone has access to ethical and reliable and also culturally relevant financial education. So I'm really happy to be here with you all tonight. The series has many different topics. Tonight's topic is money management basics. So this is what I see as really one of the foundational places to begin in the world of personal finance. So I really thank you for being here tonight and working on these basics, and hope to see you at other ones of these workshops later too. So Missouri already introduced me a little bit, just to add a little bit more so y'all know who's talking to you, who's facilitating this space. I myself come from really my family story and how I do this work, right? My mother immigrated to the Bay Area back in the 80s, and she grew up really in like a poverty and poor kind of environment, and so did my family lineage before that. And the reason she immigrated here, like many other, I think, immigrants, was for economic opportunities. And very early on after she came here, she became a single mom in raising myself and my sister. And so through those struggles, I really was experiencing all of the intersections of race, gender, and class from the beginning of my life, right? But I really didn't make sense of any of that until much later into my adulthood. I really describe myself first as an activist and someone that's committed to social justice movements across all of the isms. And I do my financial empowerment work through all of these lenses as well, because I think money is never just really about the money. It's actually how we experience all of these intersections of our lives and our communities and the values that we care about. So even though today is very focused on budgets and cash flow, know that there's also such a bigger system that we all exist in, and that it's that both and, right, of doing the work for yourself individually through workshops like this, but also working collectively towards changing the systems that we also need to change so that these cycles don't continue to replicate. So I just want to also just define, what do I mean by money management basics? Because I've learned that in the financial world, there's so many jargon all the time, and it makes me feel like, oh my gosh, do I know everything I need to know? Like, it sometimes can feel like anxiety provoking. So I wanted to just define and ground, what is money management basics? So for me, what that really entails is, first of all, just simply the daily or monthly actions that we need to take to manage our money, right? These are the things that happen at a much more regular level, because in our personal lives, we might also have really long-term things that we need to take care of too, right? Like maybe retirement or planning for life transitions. But today on money management basics, it's really just about the day-to-day things and the monthly things. So sometimes that looks like budgets, of course, and also cash flows. So if you're unfamiliar with these things, no problem. We're going to go through that later on today. It also includes saving habits. So what do we need to do to save and to really create some financial security? And things like expense management, right? Paying our bills on time, tracking our expenses. So all of these are kind of the nuts and bolts that go into what I mean by money management basics, and that's the stuff we'll be touching on today. Oftentimes this relates to other things too, like investment, like retirement, even like estate planning, which is like this big fancy word for like planning for like transition of life, right? When we pass, when our loved ones pass. So all of those are interrelated, but we have other workshops for some of those other bigger topics that we'll tell you about at the end of today. So know that today we're focusing on these things. Okay, so here's our agenda. So we're gonna warm up with a warm-up icebreaker in just a second that will segue into our budgets and cash flow. So that will be kind of our financial education kind of portion of today's agenda. Then we'll move into common experiences. And these are case studies of two really common things that I find that people I coach struggle with or work on. And we're gonna apply some of our learnings to those together. And that will also help inform some of the information and tips and resources I have for savings habits that I'll share with you at that portion too. Then towards the last segment of today's workshop, we're gonna talk a little bit about how do I know when to save and when to invest, and how do I prioritize one or the other or both, right? And that really will help then segue and launch you all into the future workshops that talk about home buying, that talk about investing, and help you connect how today's money management basics will help you decide and determine those other parts of your life. And then we'll wrap up. So we do have throughout this agenda time saved for questions. So feel free to drop those in the chat as they come up. Nina's helping me out in capturing those. And I also really welcome emojis, things in the chat, or just things that you can let me know how I'm doing, right? Or how you're feeling. I recognize that Zoom is sometimes not the most ideal way to like be in community, and come as you are, you know, being present means something different for everybody. But whatever way you can let me know how you're doing or how you're feeling, or if you have questions, I really welcome that. Okay. So here we go, budgets and cash flows. So first, I just wanted to warm up with everyone. We have like 59 folks in here. That's really cool. So I want to like stop talking and then hear from you all, like who's in the room, right? And the best way we can do this is kind of through a collective poll right now. So on the screen, I have a question for everyone to think about. How do budgets and cash flows make you feel? Yep, I see some of your reactions. So there are 8 different options of different images, right? With different kind of emotions or just like things portrayed. And there's no right or wrong answer. This is meant to be interpretive, right? Think about which image most closely represents how you feel about budgets and cash flow. And then we're gonna pull up a Zoom poll. I already see some of you are all telling us in the chat, which is great. Nina is going to help us out by actually pulling up a Zoom poll. So do they see it yet, Nina?
Yes, folks should see the poll pop up. If it doesn't, at the bottom of your screen, there's a toolbar. Go ahead and click on polls and maybe it'll pop up that way if you don't see it. So we're getting in some answers. All right, we got nearly everyone.
So while we're waiting, just a sidebar. All of these images are just shows I've been loving in the last like year and a half. So if you want show recommendations, we could talk about that offline too. But Nina, whenever you feel like we have the majority of folks or that will answer, we can share the results from the poll.
All right, I think we do. So I'm going to end this poll and share the results. But it looks like the winning image with 46% was image 4.
Okay. I don't see poll results on my screen, but could you share out just like all? Oh, here we go. I see it now. Okay. Do you want to continue to just overview the results, Nina, or would you like?
Yeah, of course. So image 4 came in with number 1 at 46%. So Isa is leading us.
Okay.
What do we have next? Image 2. Is that Marv Easttown, I think, right? With 25%. And then image 5 comes in third. Reservation Dogs, I think. We have some of the same, our view history is a little bit of the same, Rita. We got some overlap. And then there's sort of similar results across with the rest of the images. About 8 to 10 to 12% on the rest of the images.
Cool. So I wish we could hear from everyone. Unfortunately, we can't because of the size, but I'd love to just hear from a volunteer right now. If you click on image 4, Isa from Insecure, who's like this woman kind of looking to the side. Can I just get one volunteer to unmute and share why you chose that image and how you feel about budgets and cash flows? this was the majority, so I know there's lots of you. Okay, Net, go ahead.
It's Nangeli's. And I chose 4 because I feel like she looks confused and that's not like, oh Lord, I don't know what's happening over there. And for me, that's kind of how I feel about budgets. I continuously try to create one, but I'm like, am I doing it too high level or like too granular and trying to track like every transaction I do into a spreadsheet and just trying to like kind of figure out what is the best way to budget and actually stick into a budget.
Okay, thank you so much, Nangelis. I feel you. I sometimes confuse myself with my spreadsheets, and I really like my budget, so that's super real. How about one volunteer to share if you chose the 5th image, which is from the show Res Dogs or Reservation Dogs. Really great show. One volunteer to unmute and share why you chose 5. Okay, if we don't have a number 5, which one was the next one, Nina? The 3rd most common one?
The 3rd most common one was image 2.
Okay, how about someone that chose image 2? Do we have a volunteer to share? If image 2 resonated with you? Okay, so yeah, I feel like maybe the group is a little shy or multitasking.
Here, I can go. I can.
Okay, go ahead. Thank you, Dominique.
Yeah, sure. Sorry, I was moving, so I don't have my camera on. But I chose 2. I wasn't quite sure how to interpret it, but basically they kind of look pretty bummed and dejected, and basically that's how I feel. I just kind of feel crappy and guilty all the time, basically about how I'm not prioritizing it enough, and my little efforts are pretty sad, and I'll start something and like be good for like 2 weeks and then drop off. So I'm kind of just like, I just feel bad about it and feel bad about myself about it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for volunteering, Dominique, and sharing that. I really appreciate particularly your share because, well, both of your shares, because most people I talk to don't, as represented in the poll, aren't like number 8, like Garnet from Steven's Universe, like, yeah, about budgets, right? A lot of folks, I think, do feel confused and do feel sad, or like this whole thing of I should do budgeting or I should do cash flows like XYZ can be really real in how it makes us all feel. So I really appreciate your vulnerability in sharing that. And if you all maybe just don't want to unmute but want to share, please share more in the Zoom chat with each other as well. The reason why I'm starting with this is because tending to our emotional selves and our spiritual selves is actually a priority for me in my financial work, right? Because money is not just, again, the money part or the numbers part, even though budgets and cash flows could seem like that. It's really about how do we tend to ourselves so that we can feel confident or empowered, or at the very least, just able to tackle this monthly or daily chore that we have. And I also want to say that there's a reason why many of us probably don't feel great all the time about budgets and cash flows. And that's because in our world, and particularly in our country, the way that capitalism happens just really makes us feel crummy about ourselves, right? Wealth is so concentrated in such a small minority of people. Financial education is so lacking, and particularly for us as women, as gender non-binary folks, as genderqueer folks, we have so many things we're already dealing with just through these experiences, right? Let alone all the messaging that comes to us about how we can't handle money, or the literal oppression we're facing around pay inequities, workplace inequities, right? So it's normal if you feel this way that this happens. And I really want to just validate your feelings if that is what you're coming in with to today's workshop. And for the folks that do feel like Garnet number 8, or maybe even number 1, which is Aang from Avatar, right? Maybe feeling a little bit more grounded or more happy or powerful, like that's really great too, right? And there's ebbs and flows to how we feel about, I think, money management stuff, depending on where we're at in our lives. And that's really welcome too, the diversity of experiences and feelings that we may have in this space. So I'd like us to then first start with some mindset stuff, right? Before we get into the nitty gritty stuff. So I just want to ask, what do you all think is the purpose of a budget? And maybe we could just drop this in the chat if folks can participate there. What is the purpose of a budget? To keep you on track, absolutely. We're seeing a share that the hardest part of money is the emotion. The money management is the emotions, yeah. To try not to overspend more than bringing in. Ooh, maybe this is like a chat group. I've seen so many chats come in now. Let me make my Zoom chat bigger, yeah. Sorry, I won't be able to capture all of these. Identifying what is needed to achieve a goal, plan for a future purchase. Yep, an inventory of anticipated resources and expenses, yep. Budget is time, long-term well-being, feeling more autonomy with where money is going and coming and how it's coming in. Purpose, not wreck our lives. I like that. To be able to make an impact with the funds that you have. I really like that, Erica. So I'm going to take what Erica just shared and segue into what I have to offer and how I think about the purpose of budgets, right? So definitely there's a very pragmatic part of budgets, right? Not overspend, know what we have coming in and out, for sure. Those are very pragmatic things about a budget. But when it comes to the purpose of a budget, what I like to think about and hold true is that a budget helps me live intentionally and in alignment with my values. And that really connected, Erica, what you were saying about making an impact with the funds that I have, right? Because all of us have our own values, right? The values, our individual values are what drives us, right? What influences our daily actions, our behaviors. It's who we aspire to be, right? In our highest selves. It's what guides us to be who we are. And when I started trying on this definition of the purpose of a budget, it created so much more spaciousness for me in going through this very mundane monthly chore, right? Because what inspired me when I tried on this mindset was, oh, I get to be intentional about where my money goes. I get to make an impact with every dollar, right? Because our dollars do make impact. And also I get to have an accountability check, right? Am I living in alignment with my values? Or am I not? So some examples of this for me is one of my core values is really around social justice work in the biggest sense, right? Anti-oppression work. And in a money sense, I think where that translates more is trying to be anti-capitalist or aspire always to be anti-capitalist. So that's my value. And how that translates to my budget is when I reflect every year on what is my budget for this year. Years ago, I've already eliminated down my shopping budget. That doesn't mean I'm like depriving myself. I still treat myself sometimes, but I've really reduced down my shopping budget because I started thinking about, okay, if I'm about social justice and anti-capitalism, how can I get away from this consumer mindset and materialism for myself, right? And instead I redirected those dollars to my gift line item, right? And my gift line item is the line item that I use to first definitely give gifts to my friends, my family, but it's also where I make donations. It's also where I contribute to mutual aid efforts. And to me, when I started doing that, it feels really good at the end of the year when I'm seeing, cool, actually, I just did my 2021 end of the year review. I like went over my gift line item by $1,000, which could be like overspending, right? But also that was a reflection moment for me. I'm like, cool, am I living in alignment with my values? Actually, yes, and I'm happy with that decision. So it's not about punishing myself, but it becomes a tool for me to check, am I living intentionally with my values? And am I living in alignment? Now for this year, I'm like, using last year's data to adjust, oh, maybe I need to increase my projections for gifts so that I'm also not putting myself in a bad place for other things I need to pay for, right? But this is an example of, I think, how this sort of mindset can help our budgets become a tool for us to live more fully and wholly and congruent with who we are. Thank you for the feedback. I'm seeing lots of folks or several folks being like, great definition, that this is resonating, so I appreciate that. If you have questions, please keep dropping that in too. So try it on, right? Just, this is how I think about it. It doesn't mean it's the only way to think about it. If it works for you, try it on, right? So now let's actually get to the nuts and bolts of it, right? The pragmatic pieces of it. So when it comes to budgeting, here are 4/5-ish things I always look for to make the components of a budget. And I say that because the format and what your budget actually looks like, there's so many ways to do it. And I don't actually think there's one best way, because when I coach people, it's really about finding what is the way that works for you. What is the format that works for you? What modality works for you? Even what aesthetics work for you. But regardless of what kind of format of a budget you use or what mode of budgeting you use, these pieces typically are in a budget. So someone earlier was saying this too. So first, somewhere to track your income, right? Which is simply the money that you have coming in. And then somewhere to track your expenses, the money you have going out, right? So that's kind of very important in a budget. Otherwise, it's difficult to plan your money if you don't know what you have coming in and if you don't know what you have going out. But here's the other two cross factors to those first two bullet points. Next is the projected amount. So the projected amount is just what you're planning. So what you expect to have as income or what you're planning to spend. And then the actual amount is what you actually got paid, what you actually received for that side gig, or what you actually spent that month on eating out or Uber or whatever. So this fourth bullet point, the actual amount, is actually one of the most common things I find people missing or most needing to work on when it comes to budgets, right? We could pull together a budget of a plan of that projection of income and expenses together pretty quickly. Like I could sit down with you and maybe we could just even like, just stream of consciousness, write it out maybe in 15 minutes. But tracking your actuals is usually the hardest. And sometimes when I work with folks, they're like, yeah, I totally have a budget. And I'm like, cool, let me see. And then like they have all of these like planned out beautiful numbers, ideal. And I'm like, okay, so how are you actually doing? And most of the time people don't know. Mind you, I'm a financial coach. So when people are coming to me, they're like needing help in some sort of way or wanting motivation. So maybe the folks I work with is skewed, but that's very important because your plan isn't going to be helpful in you living intentionally and in evaluating if you're in alignment if you don't actually know how you're doing. And then the last piece is the cash flow, which I work with a lot of folks that identify as currently low income or coming from a low income family, maybe transitioning in their lives now, or maybe even moderate income. But particularly for folks that live more paycheck to paycheck or don't have a lot of extra surplus, cash flow tracking is very important because it's how we can know when we have money coming in, the timing of it, and when bills are due. And tracking the cash flow piece is the last piece that helps us make sure we have money in the bank. And if you don't bank, that's okay, but money like cash available to pay for your obligations. So let me just get some emojis or things in the chat. Like, how many of you all feel like you got a solid budget and cash flow kind of format system going for you right now? Thumbs up, thumbs down, or just comments in the Zoom chat. Okay, I see a couple thumbs ups. Oh, I love the emojis. I'm also a millennial, so emojis work for me. Not to stereotype millennials, but. Okay, we see some crying faces, some like squiggly faces. The like dread face, I see it. Okay, fingers crossed. Cool, cool. We're kind of like spread out, it seems like. Okay, so like I said, there's a lot of different formats for budgets and cash flows. And it's really important that you find one that works for you. If you don't have any, like you're like, I have nowhere, I'm starting from scratch. One suggestion I do have as a resource is, oh, I should have spelled it out, my bad. So CFPB stands for Consumer Finance Protection Bureau. And they are my go-to resource whenever I'm offering like any sort of financial education resources or any sort of financial literacy related things, right? They're a great government agency that was created after the 2008 economic crash recession. And at that point, folks were like, why aren't there more protections for like day-to-day people, like regular people, right? Where we can make sure that we have reliable, trustworthy information and people to help us out when we might be in situations where we're taken advantage of. So CFPB was created. They have a very robust website with lots of resources. And one thing that they have is the Your Money, Your Goals Toolkit, which I am a fan of. And I'm going to show you what it looks like. So it's live linked here. So when you get the slide deck, you can just click on the link and download it for yourself. But I'm going to share with you what it looks like when you download it. Here we go. Okay, so this toolkit is so cool. It is very long. So I would say some people might like how thorough it is, and some people might be like, oh my gosh, Rita, no. So know that this is designed where you can go in and just get what you need and ignore the rest. Or if you're really trying to like really buckle down on your personal finances, this would be a great toolkit to go through, not just for the money management basics. It covers so many topics. If you're a teacher or an educator, I think this is a great resource to use with students. If you're a parent, to do this with your children, it's really cool. And it's all free. So in this toolkit, it's broken down by different modules and it's meant to be holistic, right? So starting from offering just general information to having worksheets that you can literally go in and write in and work through yourself, it's really dope. So just to give you a little preview, like there's setting goals, there's savings as a module, tracking income and benefits, paying bills, getting through the month, dealing with debt, understanding credit reports and scores, choosing financial product services, and protecting your money. So a lot of these topics are beyond money management basics, but I wanted to let you know just how like rich this resources is. So where I wanted to take you was to page 101 for their cash flow template. So if you have nothing that you're starting with, this might be a good place to start before you try out other things. Okay, almost there. Okay, so they have a template for you and it kind of is super easy to follow on how you could build a cash flow budget. So a cash flow budget, again, the cash flow tracks when you receive and spend money, which is really important, especially if you're living, you're kind of like living without a lot of money surplus at the end of every month, right? This is really helpful to track and make sure that you're solid with your money stuff. So simply, it's kind of like 3 sections. You start with where's your balance starting at. You have a section to track the different income that you have coming in, a section to track then the expenses that you will be paying for that week. And then you end with your weekly balance at the end. When you get that, you carry that through to the next week, right? So then the next week, you know how much money you're starting with, and you repeat this process for every week. When you write it out like this, it becomes really easy to tell how much money you have to spend that week or how much money you don't have to spend if you're short. And that could help you both be preventative to hopefully not get to a place where you are short, or at least know, right? And have a better grasp of how to manage your money. This is the actual live worksheet where you can like click in and edit your own stuff. I just entered some basic numbers. This is not realistic for a budget at all, but I didn't want to overwhelm you all with a lot of numbers. So it's just very simply put in just to give you an idea of how you could use this worksheet, right? So some of you all might not need to track your money by every week, right? That might be too much for you. Or maybe it's just not your personality. You don't want to be that micro in terms of seeing your money, but the formatting kind of remains the same, right? Maybe instead of having a weekly view, you have this as a monthly view. And if that works better for you, right? If you like to manage your money by every month. I just finished a workshop with some graduate students who get paid every quarter. So for them, what I suggested was they have a budget that's tracking cash flows by quarters because that's how their income comes in. So you could decide what makes sense for you, but this is a great resource to start with if you don't know where to start. And then a couple pages down. So what this doesn't track is the actual, so that would be feedback I would give to CFPB. So to track a place for your projected and actual. So what you might do is have one piece of paper, one page for your projected amounts, what you plan, and then another duplicate copy, and you could fill in your actuals for that week. I also wanted to show you, okay, a few pages down, they also have a bill calendar template, right? So having somewhere to write out when all of your bills are due can also really help you track your cash flow and how often you get paid or when you expect to have money coming in. So that's really important too, because if you have a bunch of bills due at the same time, then money might be a little bit tighter during that period. So it helps you plan ahead. Or maybe you see that it's really nicely spread out. That's cool, right? So writing all of this out can help you get a better grasp of how your money is doing every month or every week, etc. So I'm going to go back to my slide deck now. Do we have any questions, Nina, by the way?
I don't see any questions, but folks feel free to type them in the chat at any point during our session.
Okay, cool. So say you didn't like that template, no worries, right? I went through a lot of different templates before. I'm a DIYer, so what I do, here are my other suggestions for if that template doesn't work for you. So honestly, what I personally do is I create my own spreadsheets, and I've tweaked it across. I started maybe when I was like 25, I think, and I tweaked it for the first couple of years, and now I have this spreadsheet that's so tailored to me and my personality and my money, and I just use that every year now, and it's been working for me for almost 10 years. So that's cool, right? Once you find the one that works for you, then you can stick to it, and it might take a little experimenting. So you might want to create your own spreadsheet, right? As long as it has those 5 components, the income, the expenses, projected amount, actual amount, and some sort of cash flow tracking, you're good. It doesn't even need to be fancy on a computer, right? Some of us maybe not have access to computers or don't have as much tech literacy, and that's okay, because literally this could be in a notebook, on a piece of paper that you track. Using pen and paper is also fine. If you're more into kind of like really beautiful aesthetic things, Etsy has so many really pretty budget templates that I always look at just for fun, because there's so many cool graphic designers out there that have this stuff. And then honestly, if you just, I just tried this earlier today, if you just Google free templates, there's so many different options out there available for you to download. So it's just a matter of maybe spending 30 minutes, sitting aside for 30 minutes, perusing different ones, and just get started. That's the best thing you can do, right? Just get started with a template, try it out, and keep tweaking it. So I saw in the RSVP a lot of questions about tracking, right? So how do I actually track my money? So some of these things that I have suggested in the tracking section also is a budgeting plus tracking tool. So first, if you're someone that really likes that no fuss, like what can be just easy and convenient where I can spend the least amount of time as possible, then maybe going automated route is best for you, and using apps. There's like the 2 free apps that I typically recommend are Mint, which is also a website, but an app too, and EveryDollar. So they're both free, and there's paid ones too, but I like to recommend the free ones first, because why pay when you could try something for free first, right? Mint has an ability to link all of your accounts to into there, so that it automatically already uses their algorithms to categorize your expenses. It's not 100% correct all the time, but it's pretty close, right? And then you could spend less time doing it manually. EveryDollar, the free version, does not connect to accounts. So if you wanted that convenience, that is not there, but it's also very, you have to input your own expenses. But for folks that are concerned about connecting your accounts, maybe you don't like your accounts being connected out there, maybe that's like an in-between option for you, right? You get the convenience of technology and helping organize all of your expenses, but you're manually inputting it, so it doesn't have your bank information. Also though, if you do bank, I know banks, a lot of banks nowadays have these auto features where they're helping you categorize your spending, right? So for a while I did this method, and I only stayed with one bank for a long time because I didn't want all these complicated things happening. And so if that could work for you, you could just go in-house in your bank and use their features. And that might solve some security concerns for some folks. If you're really hyper concerned about that, another suggestion I have is creating your own Google form. One of my coachees actually does this. So they created their own Google form of all of their spending categories. And every time they spend money, they have that page saved on their phone. They just go in and like press all the things, input how much they spent, and then they submit the form. And then what Google does, if you're familiar with Google Forms, it just auto like creates these graphs. It auto populates into a spreadsheet too. And so that is also another way that you could try it if you don't want to have any of your information out on like your bank or these other third-party apps. And also there's a tried and true cash envelope system, right? So this is helpful for a couple things. So a cash envelope system method is where you have envelopes filled with cash for how much you want to allocate for each of your categories of spending each month maybe. And you fill it with that cash at the top of the month or whenever you get paid. And you just pay everything with cash. And when you run out of cash, you're out of money to use, right? And so this is really helpful for folks that are trying to create different spending habits. I've had folks try that out because literally you're out of like bills to use, but also it removes all of this like digital stuff for folks that really want to be removed from that. Okay, do we have any questions in the chat that I missed, Nina?
Yeah, well, we have some folks did note that Mint doesn't recognize some credit unions. And curious how to break down big ticket items like debt, trips, etc. into manageable bites through budgeting, but wondering also if we might get into this a little bit later.
Yeah, So yeah, so Mint would be difficult if it wasn't linked to one of your credit unions. So I would say maybe try out every dollar a manual way, or maybe have, it depends on what you use that account for. Maybe create a way where you don't need to track your expenses as regularly for that credit union account and still utilize the other benefits of Mint. So there are limitations for sure with everything. And then how to break down big ticket items.
Yes, like chipping away at debt or trips into manageable bites through budgeting.
Yeah, Lucia or Lucia, if you want to unmute and share more context, that would be I'm wondering if you're curious about like how to save up for or pay for it in a cash flow sense, if it's like more than what you have coming in that month, or do you just mean something different?
Yeah, and sorry if I'm jumping ahead, or you'll get to it down the line, but I was thinking of like if you're, for us facing student loan debt or big chunky items that are overwhelming, if it's a debt thing, or on the flip side, if we want to save for a trip or start paying, thinking of saving for a down payment, how we can break it into manageable pieces through our budgeting versus being overwhelmed by like a big dollar sign amount.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing that. So what I like to do for budgeting is to have long-term views too. And for me, I use annual views, right? So I like to break down little milestones. So if in 1 year I have a trip, I literally just did this for like my anniversary trip in September, right? It's going to be a bigger ticket expense for me. And I don't want to just budget it for September when my anniversary is happening. Instead, I think about, okay, how much money do I think overall it'll cost? And then I divide that up across the months leading up to it, right? So I'm already starting to put money into kind of my revolving account. So say it was it's not $3,000, but for example, if it's $3,000, what does that come out to be a month? Like $250. I'm like really bad at math, but I just break it down for each month. And then I put a little bit of money into that account until I need it in September. And then I pull it out. And that's how I like to break down bigger ticket things. And also for really, really big ticket things like a down payment for a house. I think it's really helpful to have milestones, right? Housing is really expensive right now, particularly in California, or a wedding even, right? So how can you break it down into milestones so that the momentum can keep going, instead of saying, I'm gonna save $200,000 and it's gonna take so long, right, to get there? Maybe the milestone is the first like $20,000 and then the next 20. And breaking it down in that way can help with the motivation too, I think.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Rita,
So
Rita, another question did come in while you were speaking. Do you have one account for different financial goals or several accounts?
yeah, I have a slide on that later, Shayna. So hold on to that. Okay, so I'm gonna keep us moving. So we're gonna go into common experiences now. And this is again interactive. So I work with a lot of folks as a financial coach, and I created I think some of the most common experiences I feel like folks experience. And I want you to think, what would you do? And then chime in the chat, and then we can all learn from each other, because it's not about me, right? It's not even about whoever you see as experts. Like, really, we can learn from each other. And that's what I'm hoping we can get out of this portion of our workshop. Okay, so these are all fictional people, but distilled from my experience as a coach and what I notice as common experiences. So Lauren has an unexpected expense. Lauren is a single mom of 2 kids and makes about $3,600 a month after taxes. So this is her take-home pay. Earlier this month, her high schooler accidentally broke their laptop and now needs it replaced in order to keep up with school. What would you do? And then we also see a little sneak peek of Lauren's budget here. So this is her monthly budget tracking. And we see in her income is she's paid bi-weekly. So she has 2 paychecks, paycheck 1 and paycheck 2. And there's a projected amount column and then the actual column. And so we're assuming this happens around mid-month because she already got paid her first paycheck. So next she categorizes her expenses as fixed expenses. So for us, at what we mean by this at Sage is things that you must pay, right? That are regular reoccurring bills and that just must happen and don't really change. So Lauren's is rent, food, utilities, transportation, cell, and car insurance. And then we also have lifestyle expenses. And if you came to one of our earlier workshops, this is really Sandra Davis's coining of, rather than think about needs versus wants, which could be kind of judgy, right? Like, well, why don't you just cut out your wants, right? Instead, our lifestyle expenses are also important to us, but maybe has more flexibility compared to the fixed expenses, but they're also equally important because we want to live the lives that we want, right? So for Lauren, lifestyle expenses is eating out, fun and entertainment, and a miscellaneous amount. So we see some of the expenses already filled out, and this means Lauren has been doing her expense tracking. So she's already paid rent that month. She's already paid her utilities bill and her cell and car insurance bills. So what would you do if you were Lauren? Let's see. So Bianca sharing, LOL, I don't know if this is right, but me and my baby would be going to the library, so I have another month to save. For real, there is no true, like one right answer, right? So like, okay, so let's go to the library, right? Let's come up with alternative solutions so that Lauren can have a little bit more time to save up, right? Because as we see, she's already kind of spent almost her whole first paycheck, right? And she still has other things to pay for. So maybe that would be better for Lauren. Okay, another idea is the first thing is to see if she can check a computer out of the library. Cool, resourceful group. Then she could try a Nextdoor or other social media apps. Last, she might forgo lifestyle expenses for a couple of months. I love that, right? I love the resourceful thinking that's been shared. Because how can we live in a more interdependent society, right? And I find that sometimes we get judged for asking for help, but actually I think it's really important that we are able to ask for help because we all are interdependent and live together in a world, and to look for those things. But the other piece too was the cutting expenses. So that's also another strategy, right? Like, could Lauren forgo some expenses, and maybe for her, it's okay to cut out some of the lifestyle expenses just for that month because education is also a value perhaps, and she wants to be intentional about that too. So that is another strategy as well, cutting expenses or having a combo. I love asking the kid to cut lawns and pick neighbors' fruit, right? I myself am not a parent, but you know, there's different parenting styles, but in that example, it's great, right? Like, how can we have our youth also take responsibility and help out, right? Maybe they could pick up a job or something. And increasing income is typically another way to get through a situation like this, right? Cutting expenses, asking for help, or increasing income. In this example, having the kid. Let's see, libraries. We have lots of library lovers in this room. Okay. Yep, teaching the high schooler too about the value of money. Asking on Instagram, asking friends. Okay, I love this. So y'all, I love all of these suggestions, great ideas. And I think what I had brainstormed too is very similar to the group, right? I don't think I saw something about pulling from savings, and maybe it's because it was a trick question because I didn't write savings on this example, but if Lauren had an emergency savings, this might be a situation to use an emergency savings for, right? And a lot of times we encourage folks to try to build up your emergency savings for the unexpected expenses. So that might be another way to get through the situation. We talked about increasing income, decreasing expenses. And we've also talked about mutual aid and community funds, like helping each other out, right? What's available. I don't think I saw a suggestion for repairing, but we could also consider that, right? Could we try to repair the laptop instead of buy a new one, and try to, create a less disposable world, so to speak? And that's only if the laptop's fixable, of course, but they could also try that. And then I don't think I saw anyone say like put it on a credit card or borrow money, but that is also an option, right? Could incur some debt if none of the other options are available, or maybe Lauren is really stressed and it's really difficult and to find time to go to the library with the child, or I don't know, there's so many reasons, right? So there's also no judgment in needing to take on debt to get through a situation like this. And that's why I started at the top of my workshop with the purpose of our budgeting is really to live intentionally and in alignment with our values, right? And if in our values, because maybe Lauren's a single mom and working a lot and education's equally important, Lauren might just, but maybe her job is a lot of hours a week, right? But she also values education, so she'll put that on a credit card. That's also okay, right? If that's the right choice for Lauren. And if you are also thinking that, that's also okay if that's the right choice for you. A note about that is just simply to consider if debt is the route that Lauren takes, for Lauren to think about, okay, what would be the plan to pay off that debt? What would be the interest rates on that debt? And to also think through in the mid and long term, if that will put her into more debt longer, which then might create different stressors, or maybe it is a manageable debt that she could take on. And we definitely say look out for predatory lenders. So I would not recommend like predatory lending, like paycheck advance places or anything like that. But sometimes I hope this case study is really exemplifying. There's so many different ways to get through this, right? And the key thing to know is for the person impacted and the family impacted to really reflect on what's right for them. Okay, lots of other great suggestions in the chat. So here's our next case study. Oh wait, I forgot this slide. Saving strategies, right? Hopefully the main help in this case is that Lauren had savings, and that's why I had the saving strategy slide, right? Because emergency savings can really be preventative for us to have to go through any of these other situations. So ways that we can save and different tips for saving strategies. Sandra talked about the 52-week challenge, and I just wanted to remind you all, if you weren't at that workshop or if it's helpful, you could start with a 52-week savings challenge, right? Which is simply in 52 weeks in a year, for each week of the year, you save that dollar amount. So the first week of the year, you save $1. The second week, you save $2. The third week, you save $3. At the end of 52 weeks, you would have $1,378 saved, right? And it becomes this habit. And most definitely that could afford a very nice laptop, right? If Lauren had already done this before, but for sure other things too. Also, you could have a set goal for a percentage of your income that always goes into savings. Some people really like this, right? They're just like, cool, 10% of my paycheck goes to savings. That's it. Like, it's just automated. Like sometimes you could even set up the automatic deposits. So you don't even feel like it's missing because it already automatically went to that account. A resource I have is also saverlife.org, which is a nonprofit that Sage has partnered with in the past. And I'm a fan of them. They are a nonprofit with resources on financial education, but they have gamified savings challenges, which I think is cool. So they have games for you to play and you earn points. And then when you earn enough points, you can get little rewards at Save Your Life. So it makes it fun. And if that works for you, that's probably something you might want to check out. And there's also like the online community aspect too of Save Your Life, where you're interacting with each other, just like we're doing here tonight with other folks with similar goals. I always encourage people when you have savings goals to make it rewarding versus punitive, right? So how can we get out of the space of, darn, I didn't meet that goal, and just feeling bad about it, right? Or I suck or whatever, right? Instead, how can we make mini rewards for the milestones, going back to especially big savings goals, right? Like when you get to this milestone, what will be the reward? How will you celebrate? And it doesn't have to be a monetary reward like buying yourself something. It could just be something that you really want to do so that it's more affirming versus something that becomes punitive, and then it becomes a cycle, which we don't want to be in a negative cycle, right? We want to be supportive of ourselves and self-compassionate. And then a quick other note is just to store it in accounts with higher interest. Sometimes you might hear these as high yield savings accounts. Right now, because of the pandemic, a lot of these high yield savings accounts aren't actually that high yield, but look for accounts, right? Especially if you have a long-term savings goal, try your best to put it in an account that could at least get you a little bit more return in terms of interest rates for your dollars if you're storing it in there. Credit unions are usually a really great place that I look at for higher interest rate returns, in addition to community values. Please put your other saving strategies, ideas in the chat so that we can all learn from each other. Okay, here's our next what would you do? So here is Kelly, and what she's experiencing is that she's always a little short. So Kelly is a first-generation college graduate and is learning to manage her finances for the first time. After she received her first paycheck, she pays off all of her bills and then puts some of it in savings and then spends the rest. By the second half of the month, Kelly notices that she's always a little short money for the rest of her bills. What do you think is happening and what can she do? So here is Kelly's more of cash flow bill tracking view of her budget. And what's interesting is in total, Kelly's income in a month is $2,700 and her total expenses are $2,099 for bills. So she's actually making a lot more than her bill obligations in a month, right? But she's still always a little short. So what might be happening? We see that she has 2 paychecks, so she's paid bi-weekly, paycheck 1, paycheck 2. She has a side hustle that gives her money at the first half of the month, but no money for the second half. And then here are her bills listed out. She has rent due in the first half, her cell phone bill due, her class pass. And then the second half of the month, she has her credit card due, PG&E, student loan payment, and yoga. So what might be happening and what do you think she could do so that she's not always a little short? I'll circle back to Dominique and Jennifer's questions later. Less credit card spending. Yeah, so Tracy, so how could she cut down her credit card bill like $700 so that she could be in the clear for the second half? That's totally one thing she could look at.
I think it all depends on whether what she's spending, what she's, using her credit card for.
Yeah. So let's assume that that's fixed actually. Maybe she has maybe she has thousands of credit card debt and that's just her minimum payment or what she wants to pay for the credit card that month. So it's not what she spent that month on the credit card, it's just what she's paying off. Let's assume that's fixed. Maybe her side hustle is costing her more. Yep, she could see what is going on with her expenses, like where is it all going? She might be spending cash outside of bills that are not reflected on the budget. Yeah. Besides from this budget, maybe she's like, cool, I got the bills handled and then but she's like spending all the rest that are surplus. So what Raj is sharing is actually kind of the thing I wanted to guide you all through. Ding, 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 cash flow problem, right? So this is actually a very classic cash flow problem. So we see that at the first half of the month, Kelly has $1,500 coming in and only $895 of fixed expenses or bills to pay, right? So she has a big surplus. So probably because she feels good, she paid off her bills the first half of the month, she is spending the rest on maybe her lifestyle expenses, right? Going out with friends, donating to places, whatever. But then by the time it comes to the second half of the month, first of all, we notice that her income is lower in the second half of the month, but her expenses are also higher. Like it doesn't even break even. It's $4 over her income for the second half. So her cash flow is negative for the second half of the month, essentially. That's what that means. Whereas it's positive in the first half of the month. And overall, if she's just spending her money on the bills alone, she would still be overall cash flow positive. But because it seems like maybe she's not actually just spending on her bills, she's spending more of it on other things, she then becomes overall cash flow negative. And cash flow negative just means she's spending more than she's having come in. So some things that Kelly could try, in addition to what y'all have shared in the chat, is first of all, if she listed out the cash flow view like we just had, she might actually see clearly what we just saw, right? Like, oh, her bills are actually, first of all, she has one more bill in the second half of the month than she does the first half, but the total amount is much higher. So she could see, oh, she has a cash flow problem, right? So first writing it out like this can help illuminate that. And then as Fabi's sharing, she could consider changing the due dates for the bills, right? So a lot of times, particularly for credit cards, even like utilities, maybe even if her yoga studio is really flexible, right? She can call these folks and say, hey, can I move my bill date to be in the first half of the month? Maybe just she could pick one of them so that she could balance out her bill pay more evenly across the month. And then she could have a little bit more left over for the second half of the month, and it could be a little bit more comfortable. Also, what she could do is track her flexible expenses, as Tracy was sharing with us, right? And be more mindful of not spending out all of the cash. So she just needs to save $4 more, literally, to break even, right? So if she makes sure she has at least $4 more to cover all of her expenses for the second half of the month, she'd be good. And I'm going to show you the image from, I think, Shayna's question at the top of the session too, on different savings account bucket methods she could try. That'll be the next slide. And we already talked about changing due dates. So when we're managing money and lots of bills, it could easily become confusing, especially with different goals. So this is something that Sandra has actually talked about before that I wanted to bring up again today. I don't think she shared it in this series though. So one way you can organize your money across different accounts is to first have each account have a designated reason or what that spending is for, right? So when you get paid, one way you could think about it is to separate it by your savings accounts and your spending accounts. Over here on the savings side, you can have just one account designated for don't spend. It's your emergency fund. So you never touch that money unless it's an emergency, which is an unexpected expense, like Lauren's kid's laptop being broken, right? So you don't touch that. But then you could also have a savings account also set up for your spend, but periodic expenses, right? So earlier when we were talking about maybe like a trip or a bigger expense that you have later in the year and you're saving up for it, you could, you could put it in to the periodic expenses savings account. So it's separated from your emergency savings so they don't like collude and you get confused. but it's also more mobile, right? The money is moving in and out of that in periodically. And then over on the spending side, you could have one checking account set up for bill pay. So your bills can automatically come out of that, and you make sure that you always put in money there to cover the bills you have coming up. And then your discretionary spending account, which is for like those flexible expenses or fun money or whatever you want to call it, right? And that way you can have all of your money really separated out, and it's very clear what each account is for. And then it becomes a lot less confusing when you're looking at how much money do I have or how am I doing on that savings goal. You see it easily in these separate buckets. And then this last overdraft arrow is to, in case for some reason you overdraft from one of your accounts, you could have it linked to your periodic or emergency fund, I guess, however you want to designate it, but that covers in case you overdraft for a checking. Okay, I think I missed some questions. And Nina, please help me out.
Yeah, there was a question earlier. Do you have tips for how to search for high yield savings accounts?
Yeah, so if you're comfortable with the computer and online, the online only high yield savings accounts usually have better returns for the interest rates. So I would look at those and compare that online. And also I would start at credit unions that are local to you or match up with some sort of value that you have. For example, I bank at a credit union that serves people of color in my like neighborhood or local community, but you could choose that too. And a lot of times they have higher interest rates than a big corporate bank, like a Bank of America, for example. Okay, next question.
I think that's all the questions we have for now, but in case I missed it, in case I missed any questions, please go ahead and put them in the chat. Dominic asked, what counts as a high yield interest rate? So what's good?
Yeah, I would say definitely anything over 0.01%, which is the standard for these big banks, right? But know that these interest rates usually fluctuate with what's going on in our economy. So right now they're all pretty low because of the pandemic, because the government dropped interest rates to try to stimulate the economy. So they do fluctuate. But I would say my comparison point is usually what's better than a big corporate bank's interest rates. So anything above that. Beyond from just a high yield savings account, if you're saving for maybe longer term, you could also consider certificates of deposit, which is another type of savings account. They also usually have higher interest rates. And the trade-off is that you commit to leave your money in a certificate of deposit or CD account for a period of time. But those periods of times you can choose. So it could be as short as like 3 months, you're going to leave it in there, to like 5 years. And usually it correlates with the longer amount of time you leave it in there for, the higher interest rate they'll give you back. Yeah. Yeah, I would say that. Mm-hmm. Any other questions right now?
Someone noticed that $700 was spent on credit cards and $800 on rent. Is there an ideal debt to income ratio?
Thanks, Hiroko and Donali, for that question. Yeah, I was just like doing that for the example, but that's like, yeah, pretty high credit card payment compared to rent. So when it comes to debt to income ratio, let's see, I'll just start with, I guess, what the financial world says. Typically what the financial world recommends is trying to keep your debt relative to your income to be 36% or lower, right? So that your total debt that you pay in a year is 36% of your income for that year or lower. Because the logic is anything higher than that in terms of debt could become really, really difficult for you to pay if it's more than 36%. So that is the financial world, right? What I also want to offer from a Rita perspective is a lot of times for us as women, for BIPOC communities, for folks that grew up in immigrant households, like debt is something that either was created because we didn't have access to the resources we need, or that we were literally tricked into, or whatever the case is, right? So take that number with a grain of salt, right? I don't want folks to feel like, oh my gosh, like I'm in a terrible place if you don't meet that benchmark, right? It's about how can we work towards getting out of debt in a way that's supportive for you. And this is also particularly the case with student loan debts right now. A lot of us, in order to afford college, have needed to take out loans for that. And there's reasons why, well, first of all, why isn't education free? And so there's like so many systemic things happening. So if you have debt, I urge and see you and hope that you're able to be compassionate with whatever debt you may have. Yeah, thank you for that question. I'm going to move us to this last bit, and then we'll have more time for the more questions at the end. So a very common thing that I get asked as a coach is, okay, I have a lot of goals. How do I prioritize? And typically as a coach, I would never give an answer. I would actually coach the person through figuring out what's right for them, right? But I do have some resources and things to share that could be helpful for you to decide. So here are some very common financial goals that I think many people have that I work with, and that might be true for you. In terms of savings, a lot of folks are working towards building up an emergency savings, building up savings for some sort of midterm purchase, right? Like a bigger purchase, like a car or vacation, or a long-term purchase, like a home, typically, or a house, I should say, or education for either yourself or children in your lives, etc. And there might be other things that are important to you that I didn't list here. Folks typically also have investing goals, right? So investing for your retirement, whenever that is for you, investing in the stock market, if that's something you that's important for you, investing in assets, which is kind of the same as a house, but notice it's both, like, because a house purchase is usually so big, it's, I think, of both a saving goal to get the down payment and an investment goal for some people, because a house for many of us, most Americans, is going to be the biggest asset we own. And then notice education is also on the investment side, right? I've spent many years in education, and education is really expensive nowadays. And I do think education should be free. And I also think education is also an investment in ourselves. So how do you balance when you have goals on both sides, right, of this table? So first, I offer these foundational questions. You could journal these out, or maybe even go through these and see how you're doing with each of them. Do you have an established emergency savings? So sometimes it makes more sense to start with an emergency savings goal compared to an investment goal, because emergency savings is what could keep us out of debt or to keep us out of sticky situations, because life happens, right? I literally just got a flat tire 2 days ago, and I was like, what the heck, right? So now I'm like, do I need to pay for new tires? That's like $400 or something like that. So emergencies happen. So we always recommend try to build up your emergency savings. Do you have consistent positive cash flow, right? Do you have your money management basics down? And is that feeling good for you? Have I paid off high interest debt, right? So depending on your relationship with debt, some people don't want any debt at all. Some people are comfortable with debt. But with high interest debt, that's the key, right? So if you have a high interest debt, like 20% interest or something like that, I would say, like, look at that too, or at least have a solid plan for your debt before exploring maybe some of the other goals, or and at least seeing how they may interact with each other. And there is no one size fits all. So say you get through those and you're like, cool, I still now need to decide. So as a coach, what I would say is there's no capital R right answer for you, but there could be a lowercase r right answer for you. And these are coaching questions that I would ask you, right? What are your priorities right now? What is most important? How could you, what could you start with? What would you be okay with letting go of? What if it was a balanced approach? You didn't have to choose either or. What would that be? And what would feel most meaningful, right? And this also goes back with the budget purpose, right? How can you live intentionally and in alignment with your values? And how can that guide you to choose how you choose which financial goal priorities for this year, for 5 years from now, for 10 years from now? For folks that are looking for also more concrete data points, I also have additional things that could help you decide, right? So when you're considering between maybe you have an extra $100 a month because you're cash flow positive, you could look at an investment value calculator, such as this. I won't go through this live here now, but it's linked, right? So you could compare, okay, if you had an extra $100 and you put that in, or 1,000 in this case, and you put that in an investment account versus a savings account, how much money would you have estimated at the end of 30 years? And how does that compare to what you would have if you saved it? Sometimes those numbers help people make a decision, but sometimes those numbers don't matter because what's meaningful for them is something different. So this is just an additional data point that could be useful. I work with a lot of 20-something, 30-something-year-olds that are balancing between student loan payoff and investment goals as well. I like this calculator because it literally helps you see the numbers. So you could plug in all of your balance for your student loans and then maybe what you're thinking for an investment goal. And they say it as retirement, but you could use it for any investment goal. And then what is that extra amount you're considering about which side to put it on? You can put that all in this calculator, and it's cool because it just does all the math for you. And it tells you by paying an extra whatever a month, how much faster you could pay off your loan and how much money you would save compared to how much money you would hypothetically grow if you put it in an investment account. And then those numbers could help you compare and decide as well. And then back to CFPB, they also have a savings plan worksheet that you can go through to see sometimes if you're allocating money to an investment goal and not a savings goal, it might slow down your savings goal, right? And then when you have those data points, maybe that helps you decide, no, actually, I really want to meet the savings goal sooner and my investment for maybe retirement can start later. So again, there's no one right answer, but there could be a right answer for you. And these are different data points and different questions that you can ask yourself to arrive at what's right for you. Okay, we have another 5 minutes for any other questions that you all may have.
Thanks, Rita. Would you mind sharing the answer again about how many accounts you have or recommend for different financial goals?
Yeah, so this is in the recording, Shayna, but if you want to take a screenshot right now, this is the slide I went through to talk about one way you can organize, in this case, 4 different accounts for different emergency funds, financial goals, and then your regular spending kind of accounts. Okay, any other questions? Feel free to drop them in the chat. While we wait, I'm just going to move us forward to in life and in financial planning, everything affects everything. And hopefully you got a sense of that today, right? It's the money, but it's never really just about the money. And it's really about what's important to you and who are you as a person, because we're all unique. And then making the choices that's right for you. Here are future sessions that are coming up. So next we have home buying basics with Teresa. I will be back in February with credit and debt 101. And then Leah will come in with investing on February 15th, and then another home buying workshop on the 1st, and then investing again with Leah. And I do believe the investing ones are different topics. So because it's such a big topic. So I do believe those are they'll be covering different subtopics. And then now I'm going to toss it over to Nina with the info for Women's Foundation of California, which I'm so grateful. This was such a great group of folks. Thank you for having me. And then Nina, yeah, the info you wanted to share.
Rita, thank you so much appreciation to you. Rita will be back in February, I believe it's February 8th, for another session, but we do have a home buying session before we welcome Rita back. January 25th, home buying basics. I dropped the registration link in the chat. But if we can all just share some love and appreciation for Rita in the chat, thank you so much. If you want to learn more about Sage Financial Solutions, you can find them online. The URL is right there on the webpage. And then any other California Women Rising events, financial education workshops, you can find on our events page, as well as our California Women Rising page for Women's Foundation California. But other than that, I'll give my last thanks to you, Rita, and hope everyone has a good night, and hope I see y'all in about a week or so on January 25th.
I just want to capture, I think Esther asked one more question, and if y'all need to bounce, feel free. Is Esther still here? Yeah, okay. So Esther, I would recommend that you try to make Leah's investment workshop if you can, because for sure Leah will talk about that a lot more. But I would say first, what's going on in your budget and your cash flows, right? If you're self-employed, as I am too, right? Like making sure that you have enough to meet your minimum like needs for the year, especially if you don't get paid every month. And then what is your surplus, right? And maybe that could be the place to start in thinking about how much to invest for a retirement account, if that's important for you. Sometimes folks throw out ballparks out there like 10 to 15% of your income in retirement. I feel like that's kind of very generalized advice. I think a more specific way to do it is actually to first think about what you think you may need in retirement, what kind of life do you have, and then backwards plan from there. And my favorite retirement planning calculator is the one from Bankrate. I don't have it up. Let me see, I'm trying to pull it up right now. Because sometimes this arbitrary 10 to 15% may not actually mean anything to you. It might be too much for what you need, or it might be too little. So planning for more of like, what is your lifestyle and how much do you think you'll need and what age do you think you'll retire, and then going backwards from there. And I think Leah will cover more of this in her workshop. Let me try to find the Bankrate calculator. Okay. Here it is. Did I miss any other questions? I saw a few more chats come in.
I don't see any other questions.
Okay.
Doing another quick scan.
Cool. Yeah, I think we got it. Thank you everyone for your time and energy.
Thank you, Rita.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rita.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good night. See you soon.
Nina and Jay and Missouri, are we staying on or?